The galaxy had changed. The once mighty Vexian Empire lay in ruins, its people scattered, and its worlds broken. The Terran forces, having secured their victory, began the long process of returning to their own space, leaving behind the remnants of a civilization that had once rivaled the greatest powers of the stars. But the end of the war did not bring the peace that many had hoped for. Instead, it left a void, a lingering sense of unease that spread across the galaxy like a shadow. On the bridge of the TCS Resolute, Admiral Ethan Drake stood alone, staring out into the vastness of space. The destruction of the Vexian homeworlds had been necessary, or so he had convinced himself, but the reality of their actions weighed heavily on his mind. He had led the charge, directed the fleet, and executed the final orders that had brought the Vexians to their knees. Yet, in the quiet moments when the battles were over and the stars were silent, he could not shake the feeling that something had been lost, something beyond the lives and ships that had been sacrificed. Commander Sarah Lynn entered the bridge, her footsteps soft against the metal floor. She had been with Drake from the beginning, through every diplomatic effort, every battle, every difficult decision. "Admiral," she began, her voice steady but tinged with concern, "the fleet is preparing for the return to Earth. The cleanup operations are nearly complete." Drake nodded, but his gaze remained fixed on the stars. "We did what we had to do, Sarah," he said quietly. "But now that it's over, I wonder if we truly won. We broke the Vexians, but at what cost? Their empire is shattered, their people are scattered, and the galaxy will remember us not just as protectors, but as conquerors." Lynn approached him, standing beside her commander as they both looked out into the void. "War changes us, Ethan. We went into this hoping for peace, but the Vexians saw us as a threat. They refused to adapt, and in the end, they forced our hand. It's not easy to reconcile that with who we want to be, but sometimes survival demands hard choices." Drake sighed, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. The Vexians were proud, too proud to see that their traditions were leading them to destruction. We tried to show them a different way, but they couldn't let go of their past. And now, their worlds are in ruins. And we have to live with the knowledge that we were the ones who brought them to this point. "The galaxy will heal," Lynn said, trying to offer some comfort. "The Vexians who remain will have to find a new path, one that doesn't rely on the rigid structures that once defined them. And we have to ensure that this kind of conflict doesn't happen again. We have to be better, for the sake of everyone." Drake turned to face her, his expression one of quiet resolve. "You're right, Sarah. The war is over, but our work isn't done. We have to help rebuild, to guide the galaxy toward a future where war isn't the only answer. We have to show that, despite everything, peace is still worth striving for." As the Resolute prepared to depart Vexian space, the crew could feel the weight of what had transpired. The stars, once witnesses to the grandeur of the Vexian Empire, now bore silent testimony to its fall. The destruction of the Vexian leadership, the loss of Queen Zahala, and the devastation of their homeworlds were all etched into the history of the galaxy. But even in the aftermath, there was a glimmer of hope. The Vexians who survived the war, scattered across the stars, began to rebuild. They knew they could never return to the ways of old, but perhaps they could forge a new path, one that embraced change rather than resisted it. For the Terrans, the war had been a painful lesson in the consequences of power and the fragility of peace. As the fleet set course for home, the crew of the Resolute could only hope that the future would be different. The galaxy had been scarred by the conflict, but it had also been given a chance to start anew. And maybe, just maybe, the sacrifices made would lead to a lasting peace, one that would honor the memory of all who had fallen. The stars, now quiet, held the promise of a new beginning, a beginning that both Terran and Vexian alike would have to navigate together. The war was over, but the story of the galaxy was far from complete. The lessons learned, the scars borne, and the hope for a better future would guide them as they moved forward, one star at a time. The Terran fleet moved silently through the void, the echoes of their victory over the Vexian Empire still reverberating in the minds of those who had fought. Admiral Ethan Drake stood on the bridge of the TCS Resolute, his thoughts heavy with the burden of what had been done. The stars outside seemed distant, cold, offering no solace from the weight of the choices that had led to this moment. The Vexians had been a formidable enemy, their society built on traditions as ancient as the stars themselves, but in the end, they had been broken, shattered by the relentless advance of the Terran forces. Commander Sarah Lynn, ever the steady presence at Drake's side, approached quietly, her expression mirroring the somber mood that had settled over the entire fleet. "Admiral," she began, her voice low, "the fleet is ready to depart Vexian space. All systems are green. Drake nodded, though his gaze remained fixed on the expanse before them. "We came here hoping for peace," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "We wanted to find common ground, to build something lasting. But in the end, we were left with no choice but to destroy what we couldn't save." Lynn stepped closer, her eyes reflecting the shared pain of their experiences. The Vexians were too proud, too rigid in their ways. They couldn't see that their traditions were leading them to ruin. We offered them another path, but they refused. We had to do what was necessary to protect our own. Drake sighed, the weight of his command heavy on his shoulders. And now their empire is in ruins, their people scattered. What was once a proud civilization has been reduced to ashes. I can't help but wonder if we could have done something differently if there was another way. Lynn placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "We did everything we could, Ethan. But sometimes no matter how hard we try, war is inevitable. The Vexians forced our hand and we had to respond. Now it's up to those who remain to find a way forward. Perhaps in time they will see that change isn't something to be feared." As the Resolute and the rest of the fleet prepared to make their journey back to Earth, the remnants of the Vexian Empire were left behind to pick up the pieces. The Vexians who survived the war faced an uncertain future. Their rigid caste system, once the bedrock of their society, was now a shattered relic of a bygone era. With their traditions broken and their worlds in ruin, they would have to find a new way to survive in a galaxy that had moved on without them. But even in the depths of despair, there was a flicker of hope. Among the survivors, a new generation began to emerge, Vexians who had seen the destruction wrought by the war and understood that their society could not continue as it had. These young Vexians, unburdened by the traditions of the past, looked to the future with cautious optimism. They knew that their people had to adapt, to embrace change or face extinction. On Earth, the news of the Vexian surrender was met with a mixture of relief and reflection. The war had been won, but the cost had been high. The destruction of Eris Prime had ignited a fire within the Terran people, a determination to see the war through to its bitter end. But now that it was over, there was little celebration. The galaxy had been scarred by the conflict, and those scars would take time to heal. Admiral Drake, standing once again at the bridge of his ship, felt the full weight of their actions. "We won the war," he said softly, "but the victory feels hollow. We've lost something vital along the way, something that can't be regained." Lynn, standing beside him, nodded in agreement. "The galaxy will remember the Vexians for what they were, but they'll remember us for what we did. We have to make sure that this war wasn't for nothing, that we use this victory to build a better future." Drake turned to her, his expression resolute. "We will, Sarah, we have to. The galaxy is watching, and it's up to us to ensure that what comes next is something worth fighting for." As the Terran fleet set course for home, leaving behind the ruins of the Vexian worlds, there was a sense of finality. A chapter in the history of the galaxy had come to an end. But with that end came the possibility of a new beginning. The war was over, but the story of the galaxy was far from complete. The Terrans and the Vexians alike would have to navigate the uncertain future that lay ahead, guided by the lessons learned and the hope that, even in the wake of destruction, something new and better could emerge. And so, as the stars continued to shine cold and distant, the Terrans and Vexians began to rebuild, one from the ashes of a shattered empire, and the other from the weight of a victory that had come at too high a cost. The galaxy would remember the war, the battles fought, and the lives lost, but it would also look to the future, to the possibility of peace, and to the hope that, one day, the scars of the past would heal, leaving behind a galaxy united not by war, but by the shared desire to survive, to grow, and to thrive. The Terran fleet moved through the stars, the vast emptiness of space a stark contrast to the turmoil that lingered in their minds. Admiral Ethan Drake, a man who had seen countless battles, now found himself grappling with a victory that felt more like a loss. The Vexian Empire, once a beacon of strength and tradition, was now nothing more than a collection of shattered worlds and broken people. The Terrans had won, but the price of that victory hung heavy in the air. Commander Sarah Lynn stood by his side on the bridge of the TCS Resolute, her presence a quiet comfort in the aftermath of war. "The fleet is ready to depart, Admiral," she said softly, her voice filled with the same weariness that seemed to permeate the ship. "All systems are green. We're heading home." Drake nodded, his gaze still fixed on the stars ahead. "We set out to make peace, Sarah. We thought we could find a way to coexist to avoid this, but in the end we had no choice. The Vexians saw us as a threat, something that had to be eradicated. We did what we had to do, but it doesn't feel like a victory." Lynn glanced at him, understanding the weight of his words. War changes us, Ethan. We tried diplomacy, but they wouldn't bend. They were too rooted in their traditions, too proud to see that the galaxy was changing around them. And now they have to rebuild from nothing. As the Terran fleet began to move away from Vexian space, the remnants of the Vexian Empire were left to pick up the pieces. The survivors, those who had managed to escape the full wrath of the Terran assault, now faced a future that was uncertain and fraught with challenges. Their once unshakable caste system, the very foundation of their society, had crumbled under the weight of their defeat. The traditions they had clung to so fiercely were now seen by many as chains that had led them to ruin. But within the remnants of the Vexian worlds, there were those who saw the fall of their empire not just as an end, but as an opportunity. A new generation of Vexians, born in the midst of war, began to question the old ways. These young Vexians, unburdened by the strict hierarchies of their ancestors, looked to the future with a sense of determination. They knew that their survival depended on their ability to adapt, to embrace change rather than resist it. On Earth, the news of the Vexian surrender was met with a mixture of relief and contemplation. The Terrans had achieved their goal, but the cost of that victory was evident to all. The destruction of Eris Prime had ignited a fire within the Terran people, a determination to see the war through to its bitter end. But now that it was over, there was little to celebrate. The galaxy had been scarred by the conflict, and those scars would not easily heal. Admiral Drake, standing once again on the bridge of his ship, felt the full weight of the decisions he had made. "We did what was necessary," he said, his voice filled with a quiet resignation. "But now that the war is over, I can't help but wonder what we've lost along the way. We shattered an empire, but we've also shattered something within ourselves." Lynn, ever the voice of reason, placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We did what we had to do, Ethan. The Vexians were a threat, and we couldn't let them destroy everything we stand for. But now it's up to us to make sure that this victory leads to something better, that the galaxy can heal from this and move forward." As the Resolute and the rest of the fleet set their course for home, the remnants of the Vexian Empire were left behind, a reminder of the price of war. The Vexians who survived faced a future filled with uncertainty. Their society, once defined by its rigid caste system and unyielding traditions, was now in disarray. They would have to find a new way to live, to rebuild from the ashes of their former glory. But even in the depths of their despair, there was a flicker of hope. The young Vexians, those who had grown up in the shadow of war, began to take the lead in shaping their people's future. They knew that their survival depended on their ability to adapt, to let go of the old ways and embrace the possibilities of a new era. They would rebuild not just their worlds but their society, forging a new path that could endure in a galaxy that had been forever changed. As the Terran fleet moved further from Vexian space, there was a sense of finality, but also of new beginnings. The war had ended, but the story of the galaxy was far from complete. The scars left by the conflict would take time to heal, but with time there was hope that something new and better could emerge from the ruins. The Terrans and Vexians alike would have to navigate this new reality, learning to live in a galaxy that had been reshaped by their actions. And so, as the stars continued to shine, cold and distant, the Terrans and Vexians began the long process of rebuilding, one from the weight of a hard-won victory, and the other from the ashes of a fallen empire. The galaxy would remember the war, the battles fought, and the lives lost, but it would also look to the future, to the hope that, in the wake of destruction, something new could be born. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape, one star at a time. As the Terran fleet continued its journey back to Earth, the weight of their victory and the destruction it had wrought lingered like a shadow over the crew. The vastness of space, once filled with the thrill of exploration and discovery, now felt oppressive, a silent reminder of the cost of their triumph. The bridge of the TCS Resolute was quieter than usual, the crew absorbed in their thoughts, each grappling with the aftermath of the war in their own way. Admiral Ethan Drake stood at his usual post, his eyes scanning the stars as if searching for answers in their cold, distant light. The image of Queen Zahala's final moments, her desperate broadcast, and the obliteration of her ship played on a loop in his mind. He had seen the end of many conflicts, but none had left him feeling so hollow. The Vexians had been a formidable foe, yes, but they had also been a civilization with a rich history and deep-rooted traditions. Now, they were scattered, their worlds in ruins, their way of life shattered beyond repair. Commander Sarah Lynn, noticing the Admiral's distant gaze, approached him cautiously. She had come to know Drake well over the course of the war, and she could sense the turmoil that lay beneath his stoic exterior. "Ethan," she said softly, using his first name in a rare moment of personal connection, "you've been standing here for hours. You should rest." Drake shook his head, his eyes never leaving the stars. "I can't rest, Sarah. Not yet. We've won the war, but I keep thinking about the Vexians, about what we've done to them. We destroyed their empire, but in doing so, we may have destroyed something in ourselves too." Lynn nodded, understanding his anguish. "War forces us to make impossible choices. We tried to avoid this outcome, but the Vexians left us no alternative. They clung to their traditions so tightly that they couldn't see they were leading themselves to destruction. We had to act, or risk losing everything we stand for." Drake sighed, finally turning to face her. "I know you're right. But it doesn't make it any easier to accept. We didn't just defeat them, Sarah, we annihilated their way of life. And now, they're left to pick up the pieces, to figure out how to survive in a galaxy that's moved on without them." As the Resolute continued its journey, the galaxy outside remained a vast, empty expanse, but within the ship, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of relief and regret. The war was over. But the cost of that victory was something the crew would carry with them long after they returned home. The destruction of the Vexian Empire had been necessary, but it had also been a sobering reminder of the fragility of civilization, back in Vexian space. The survivors of the Empire's collapse were beginning to face the harsh reality of their new existence. The rigid caste system that had once defined every aspect of their lives was now in disarray, its foundations shattered by the Terran assault. The Vexians, once so proud and unyielding, were now forced to confront the possibility of change, something they had resisted for so long. Among the survivors, there were those who recognized that the old ways could no longer sustain them. The younger generation, born during the war and unburdened by the traditions of the past, began to take the lead in rebuilding their society. They understood that survival required adaptability, that they could no longer afford to cling to the structures that had led them to the brink of extinction. These young Vexians saw the war as a painful but necessary turning point, a chance to forge a new identity in a galaxy that had been irrevocably changed. On Earth, the news of the Vexian surrender brought a sense of closure, but it was tempered by a deep sense of introspection. The Terran people, who had long prided themselves on their role as peacekeepers, were now forced to reckon with the consequences of their actions. The destruction of Eris Prime had galvanized them, driven them to pursue the war to its bitter end, but now that it was over, there was little satisfaction in their victory. Admiral Drake, reflecting on the war's end, could not shake the feeling that something vital had been lost. "We did what was necessary," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his thoughts. "But now that it's over, I wonder if we've lost more than just lives and ships. We've lost a part of ourselves, our belief that we could always find a better way." Lynn, standing beside him, offered a small, reassuring smile. "We can't change the past, Ethan. But we can learn from it. The galaxy is watching us, and it's up to us to show that we're not just conquerors, that we're builders too. We have to help the Vexians rebuild, to guide them toward a future where they can thrive alongside us." Drake nodded, his resolve hardening. "You're right. The war may be over, but our work is just beginning. We have to ensure that what comes next is a future worth fighting for, a future where the mistakes of the past aren't repeated." As the Resolute and the Terran fleet moved further away from Vexian space, the remnants of the Vexian Empire continued their struggle to rebuild. The young Vexians, unencumbered by the rigid traditions of their ancestors, began to forge a new path, one that embraced change and adaptability as keys to their survival. The scars of the war would remain, but from those scars, something new and stronger could emerge. In the depths of space, the Terran fleet carried the weight of its victory and the responsibility of ensuring that the future would be different. The stars, once witnesses to the rise and fall of empires, now held the promise of new beginnings. The war had ended, but the story of the galaxy was far from complete. It was a story that would be written by both Terran and Vexian alike, as they navigated the uncertain future that lay ahead. And so, as the stars continued to shine cold and distant, the Terrans and Vexians began the long process of rebuilding, one from the remnants of a shattered empire, and the other from the heavy burden of victory. The galaxy would remember the war, the battles fought, and the lives lost, but it would also look to the future, to the hope that, in the wake of destruction, something new and better could emerge. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape, one star at a time.